welcome to Break the World's Shell. Anime Apocalypses, a social and personal revolution. This is my third panel of the con already. I have 8 more. Slightly frazzled already. Hi, I'm Jen A. Blue. I also go by Frobor online. I write about animation. I'm the author of several books. And this is a condensation of a chapter from my book Animated Discussions, which is a collection of essays about anime. If you were at my Full Metal Alchemy panel earlier, that's also a condensed book chapter. I'm curious how many people were there. Cool, welcome back. Okay, so before we start, some welcomes and warnings. First off, trigger warning. Works discussed in this panel include instances of child abuse, rape, incest, and violent death and destruction, because we're talking about the apocalypse. Bad stuff happens. Mention of any or all of these things may occur. I will not be showing any images of that, but mentions will occur. Actually, there may be some images of destruction. Some of the works discussed in this panel have religious significance for some people. Again, we're talking about the apocalypse. Keep in mind that for this panel, I'm discussing these works as literature in a historical context. This is not a theology class. It is not my intent to tell anyone what to believe. I am just talking about literature in a historical context. Finally, spoiler warning. Actually, this one is no longer true because I've updated this panel. I am actually going to spoil things that are like 2 years old. But most of what I spoil is either more than 10 years old or ridiculously popular and discussed everywhere. Odds are, if you care at all about this thing I'm talking about, you have seen it. And honestly, people, the Epic of Gilgamesh is 5,000 years old. There's a statute of limitations, okay? If you haven't read it yet and I spoil it, I'm sorry, that's on you. So, what is apocalypse? I am looking at apocalypse as a genre. It is a type of literature, and then once film comes along, of film and television and all that good stuff. The apocalypse originates as a Near Eastern genre. Most cultures in the world do not have apocalypse legends. Most world cultures have either nothing of the sort or have a cyclical history. You know, things come back around. And there might be phases of destruction, but everything comes back around again. The idea of stuff happens and then that's it, the world has ended, that's a Near Eastern idea. It spreads from there through Western culture, and then quite a bit later starts moving east, and eventually Japan picks it up. Apocalypse is a Greek term. In Greek, it means revelation. There is a particular thing in the apocalypse genre. It's kind of the all-time bestseller that has that title, and the Greek name for it is apocalypse. In English, people got a hold of that book, saw what it was about, and just assumed that's what the word apocalypse meant. So in English, the word apocalypse means the end of the world. And initially, the literary genre that we're talking about, initially it was revelation. It was pulling back the veil. It was showing secrets of how the world really is. And then over time, it became stuff about the end of the world. So, for purposes of this panel, an apocalypse is a story that is about or contains a catastrophe. That catastrophe can be anything. It can be a natural disaster, it can be divine judgment, it can be humans fucking things up as we always do. It can be an accident. Second, it destroys the prevailing social structure. It ends the world as we know it. And that destruction happens on a setting-wide scale, no matter what the setting is. There is at least one apocalypse that I will be discussing in this panel that is localized to a single high school. But it's still an apocalypse, and it is described as one in the show. There are other ones that are an entire, like the entire planet Earth. There are other ones that are implied to be the entire universe. It varies. So what is not an apocalypse? Post-apocalyptic things are not part of the apocalypse genre. They're their own genre. The difference is, in a post-apocalypse, the catastrophe occurs either before the story or at the very beginning. So from the very start of the story, social structures are already gone. So this is not a story about destroying them, this is a story about how they're gone. The focus is on characters trying to survive or trying to build a new society. Fist of the North Star is a good example. You know, there's nothing to destroy because it's already destroyed. Disasters are things that are similar to a catastrophe, but it might be smaller scale. More importantly, it's about the characters stopping a potential apocalypse. It's about the characters saving the social order, and thereby affirming it as strong enough to endure disaster. A good example of this is Summer Wars, which is all about how great families are. And families are so great, they stop the meteor from killing everybody. Was it a meteor, nuclear strike, something like that. I get it confused with that Digimon movie that's exactly the same movie, by the same director. Anyway, hybrids of these can happen. Gurren Lagann starts post-apocalyptic, then it's a disaster, and then it's an apocalypse. In different arcs, and on different scales. So, let's go to some of the early stuff that feeds into this. I did mention the Epic of Gilgamesh. There is a reason I mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh, because in addition to being the oldest story we know of, it is the oldest one that we have a copy of, it is also the oldest copy of something vaguely resembling an apocalypse. Specifically, within the Epic of Gilgamesh, a character named Utnapishtim tells his story. And it begins with the gods assigning that humans are too noisy, which I love. Can you just imagine being the gods and being like the upstairs neighbor over a really obnoxious party? And just being like, oh God, will you guys shut up? Okay, you know what, I'm just gonna flood you. So the gods flood the world to kill all of humanity for being noisy. The god Ea is like, you know, that seems kind of extreme, so I'm gonna warn someone. He warns Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim builds a boat, gathers samples of all known life, and sails off to safety. This story may seem a little familiar. There are other versions of it that show up later, some of which may be better known. This is the first version of it we have. Fast forward quite a long time. The gap between the Epic of Gilgamesh and Plato is as big as the gap between Plato and us. Atlantis. Atlantis is a story told in Plato's Timaeus Critias trilogy, except he never actually finished the trilogy, so it's only told in two things. And he tells a story about this war between Athens and this other city, Atlantis. And Athens, in his story, is exactly how Plato thinks things should work. It's his like perfect model of how society should be. And Atlantis is all the bad ideas. Atlantis is everything he thinks that's wrong about how real Athens is wrong. Atlantis gets corrupt and tries to conquer the world, as one does. And Athens leads an alliance to stop them. Later, the gods are like, you know, these Atlantis guys suck. Possibly they were being very noisy. So they destroy Atlantis with an earthquake and a flood. This story has become fairly well known in slightly modified form. We get a lot of stories in which there's this place called Atlantis that was destroyed. But neither of these stories is exactly an apocalypse, but they're close, and they feed into later apocalypses in important ways. So let's get to the origins of the genre. Let's talk about the Book of Daniel. Now, at this point, so we're talking about a book that is set quite a bit before that, but it's being written somewhere around the Seleucid occupation of the Jews, which was around, I want to say, 200 BC? But it's talking about a period long before that, a period that was already legendary. And that period was the Babylonian exile. And Daniel seems to have been like, prior to the writing of this book, seems to have been like a Jewish folk hero from that, is set in that period. But they wrote a book about Daniel, and he's living in Babylon, and he has these prophecies about bad stuff coming for Babylon, and then Babylon gets conquered and overthrown. And there's all sorts of other prophecies in there. This is actually, I could look it up, but we actually know exactly what year this book was written in, which is really rare for a book that old, because it is accurate. The prophecies are all accurate up to that year, and then they kind of stop. It is a reminder to people living under oppression that, you're living under oppression. You're not allowed to have books that are like, these Seleucid guys are going to get destroyed and will go free. The people who conquered you are not fans of that kind of literature. But if you have something set in the distant past about someone else who was oppressing you and got overthrown and conquered and you got to go free, there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's just, that's about then. That's not about now. Mm-hmm. This is really important because this is one of the key things to the apocalypse genre. One of its key functions is to remind you that everything ends. Whoever is oppressing you, whatever bad stuff you're putting up with, it's not going to last forever because nothing lasts forever. This proved really popular. We have dozens of Jewish and early Christian examples of this kind of stuff over the next 3-4 centuries. And that means there was a lot more than dozens of them being written, because most books from that long ago do not survive. There have to have been thousands of books like this being written. Towards the end of the period where these are being written, that's where we get Revelation. It's important to recognize that at the time Revelation was written, there were a lot of Christianities, plural, competing. They all had different ideas about things that today are kind of taken for granted by most Christians as being really basic. Among the questions they disagreed on were things like, do you have to be Jewish to be Christian? Are Christians allowed to participate in the larger community, or do they have to retreat into communes? Do Christians have to follow kosher laws? Was Jesus a human? Really stuff that's really considered really basic now, but at the time people were arguing about it. They had all sorts of different factions. The book of Revelation is really clearly, there's all sorts of clues in there that it is written by someone who believes you do have to be Jewish to be Christian, and you do have to leave the larger world and retreat into a commune. As you might expect from that latter one, there's some revolutionary sensibilities going on in here. Just like in the book of Daniel, Babylon is code for the oppressor. This time it's Rome, and there's all sorts of clues in there that the villains of the book of Revelation are Rome. Again, it's an apocalypse. It can be read as whoever's oppressing you, but that's, if you read it as literature that was written in that time, that's what it comes across as. And God comes in, destroys the oppressor, rewards the faithful, renews the world. That sounds awesome if you are, living with a dozen other people in a cave in a country where your religion is illegal and you'll be murdered for practicing it. So this is really important, because this is really how the apocalypse genre looks at its beginning. It is political literature. It is revolutionary literature. The apocalypse is about overthrowing a corrupt system. It's about ending oppression. It's about upending hierarchies. It's about the rise of a new order. By the end of the 1st century, apocalypse literature is being used to express political anger. It's usually ending with a tone of faith and hope. It's heavily metaphorical, to the point of almost being written in code. It predicts the end of some kind of evil order that is dominating the world, and it predicts the creation of a better world. Now, let's fast forward a lot. End of the 19th century. War of the Worlds. This is a classic novel. It's about Martian invasion. Mars invade the world and slaughter everybody and then get the flu and die. Spoilers. This was a lot of firsts. This was the first alien invasion ever written. It's also the first appearance of giant mecha. That thing, that's what Martians look like. That's just a scaled up metal version of one, with one inside piloting it. Does that sound familiar to anime fans? Debatably, it is also the first appearance of tentacle monsters. There's Japanese art that predates this, that depicts sexual interactions with things that have tentacles, but that was animals with tentacles. This is alien monsters with tentacles. They don't do anything sexual because Victorian era, but they're tentacle monsters. Like, they are blobs with tentacles. Now, the thing is, as I mentioned, the Martians die of the flu at the end. So you can kind of ask, well, isn't this really a disaster novel? Because the Martians lose. We win. Except we don't. The flu wins. By the end of the novel, the Martians have completely destroyed Britain. Probably the rest of the world as well. We don't really get to see much of it. They stop just short of wiping out humanity because they get the flu and die, but they have very nearly destroyed Britain. And there is a reason for that, because Wells was a hardcore socialist. Wells was an anti-imperialist. Wells wrote this because he looked at what Britain was doing in places like Africa. Coming in with more advanced weaponry, slaughtering people, taking over, setting up their own stuff. And he was like, you know what? Let's see how you like it. Let's write a novel where someone does that to Britain and utterly destroys the British Empire. By modern standards, Wells would basically be called an SJW. Like, he was just every progressive cause of his time, he was hardcore for. So that's kind of what this novel is. That's the political anger that it's expressing. Now then something interesting happens shortly after this. Okay. Little book called Damien, The Story of Emile Sinclair's Youth. Has anybody here read that? No. Okay. This is one of my favorite books. This is by Hermann Hesse. It's a German novel, and it's the story of the adolescence of a boy named Emile. And Emile is conflicted between being good and being evil. But by good, what he means is good as presented to him by his family. Good meaning being a good little Christian boy. And evil being to do what he really desires and really wants. And it is heavily implied that he's probably bi. The reading is there, very much so. He gets drawn into the orbit of a handsome older boy named Damien. You see what I mean? This is basically a shonen anime. And Damien is strong and proud and independent. And Damien is like good and evil. Who cares? The important thing is to live according to how you choose to live according to your own values. And there's this great scene where Emile is like, well, but wouldn't people just rape and murder and steal from each other all the time? And Damien's like, no. Because if you really lived to your own potential and your own values, nobody would want to do that. Because what would the benefit be? Mixed in with this is this whole thing involving this religion that his mother belonged to. That it is a Gnostic religion that worships the god Abraxas, who is the creator of both good and evil and is above both of them. Abraxas is, like the religion of Abraxas predicts that the world is coming to an end, by which they mean the old concept of good and evil is going to be destroyed and a new world is going to be built that has new ways of doing things, and then World War I happens. Which, yeah, that is kind of what happened. Interesting things this is doing. First of all, it is representing apocalypse as a personal revolution. World War I happens, off stage. It happens between the last and second to last chapter. And it's Emil's individual life that is transformed. There's certainly implication that European culture is changing as well, which again, World War I did have that effect. But it's mostly his life that is being altered. The other thing is, and this is kind of in continuity with the tradition of apocalypse literature, it's depicting it as a rebirth. It's saying that this world is getting old and constraining, and we need to break free of it into something new and be reborn. And I need to pull something up, but just to make clear that this does have a fairly serious impact on anime, and I'm really sorry I didn't do this before the panel. I have been running around today. Here we go. Okay. Sorry. So I'm going to read you a quote from Damien. Oh no. Sound. The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever will be born must first destroy the world. We are the bird. The bird flies to God. That God's name is Abraxas. Essentially the same speech, and just to make absolutely certain that this is what's going on, the name of the musical track that plays in that recurring scene in Utena is That God's Name is Abraxas. Damien is one of Kunihiko Ikuhara's favorite books, and he talks in the notes for one of the editions of Utena. He talks about discovering it as a teenager and it transforming his life, and also that when he became friends with guy who directed Neon Genesis Evangelion. Somebody help me. Hideaki Anno. That when he became friends with Hideaki Anno, the first thing he did was force him to read Damien. It's, you know, it has had an impact, and we will see that as we go forward. So, since we're now talking about anime, let's talk about some anime. All right, here's one. I mean, if you're going to do anime and apocalypse, come on, you have to. Who's seen it? Good. It is a good movie. So, Akira. I'm not going to get too much into the plot. I'm going to talk a little bit about themes. Akira is very much about this idea of the anxiety of power. The idea that having power is an anxious state. So we open with this society in breakdown. We open with images of society breaking down. We see stuff like protests and gang violence and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of an exaggerated version of our own society. You know, some of the same problems taken up to the next level. What it suggests, what it explores as the movie goes on, is the idea that if you have power, but you are afraid of losing that power, or of change, or of anything that frightens you, you will lash out violently. You will use that power for violence. And that because of this, and because the society around them is broken, people want apocalypse. There's a scene, an apocalyptic event happened before the movie, and people rebuilt. And there's a scene where the military commander talks about how much better things were right after the apocalyptic event. Because everybody was working together with a common cause to rebuild. And now everybody is fighting, there's factions, there's different people want different things. It would be so much better if things went back to the way they were right after the apocalypse, which would kind of require there to be an apocalypse. There's also an apocalyptic cult going on. Everybody wants change, and they want change on such a massive scale that it means the complete destruction of what went before. And then we get a double apocalypse. First, there's a military coup, a literal revolution. that overthrows the political structure. And then Tetsuo pretty much single-handedly wipes out the military and takes over the city. And then stuff gets weird. It was already pretty weird, it gets really weird. And eventually, Akira and Tetsuo make this whole destroy and rebirth the world thing literal by creating an entire new universe and splitting it off from ours and going off to do whatever they do, while in the ruins of the city, Kei and Kaneda are left to start over as the new, first man and first woman eventually. Presumably there are other survivors, but at least the way it's depicted kind of frames them as being like, to use the major Western example, Adam and Eve. It's people wanting revolution because they are anxious about the power they have or the power others have over them, and so they want to overthrow the structures that power comes from, essentially. All right, let's move on to something I just mentioned, Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is on Netflix now, which is so weird. I remember the effort it took to get tapes of this in like 1996. I'm old. So, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Again, not going to get too much into plot details or we'd be here all night. It has a sprawling, complicated plot, only about a quarter of which is actually on the screen. But basically, you've got humans and angels. Angels are big old monsters, which is actually pretty accurate to how they were depicted traditionally. And humans and angels both want to end the world. We don't know that initially. Initially, we think the humans are fighting to save the world. They are not. What they're actually fighting over is who gets to define the new world. Who gets to decide how things are going to be after the apocalypse. And in the final two episodes, which are brilliant, by the way, and I will hear nothing negative about them, the final two episodes are an examination of the main character, Shinji. His world is being destroyed just off screen, that's what the movie is, and he is being broken down. This is that personal revolution again. What book did Ikuhara loan Anno when they first met? This is that personal, like the revolution is about personal evolution and personal maturation. Apocalypse and change, destroying the old and becoming the new, is what adolescents are doing. It's destroying the child to become, in this case, the man. And what Shinji realizes is that he defines his world. He essentially, hello? Did my mic just cut out?
Yes.
We can still hear you.
Okay. He essentially decides that, he realizes that he can decide how he interprets the world around him, and in that sense, he wins the fight over who gets to define the world. He does, and so does everyone else. This is basically, Damien has a lot of connections with Jungian psychology, and with that way of looking at how people's minds work. Neon Genesis Evangelion is playing with the same ideas, but it's swapping out Jung for a different school of therapy that's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and the root idea of it comes out of what's called Neo-Stoic philosophy. It's complicated, but the root idea is that you do not have feelings in response to what happens to you. You have feelings in response to what you think about what happens to you. And that if you can mindfully alter how you think about things, you can change how you feel about things into something, hopefully, a healthier pattern. That is essentially what the last two episodes are teaching Shinji. That he thinks about things in a destructive, negative way, always looking on the dark side, and he could choose to think differently. This ends his childhood and thereby ends the world. Congratulations. Now, the best anime ever made. How many people have seen this? That is disappointing. It is free legally on YouTube. Nozubi Entertainment, who own the US rights to it, have uploaded the whole thing to YouTube. You can watch it whenever you want. It also had a Blu-ray release a couple of years ago that's gorgeous. I got this ring out of it. So, this is basically gender swap Damien. It's a story of forbidden love and Yuri. It's the story of Utena and Anthe, who are just gals being pals, clearly. And it's exploring a lot of stuff, and I have a whole panel on it tomorrow afternoon. But basically, it's exploring this idea of the princess-witch dichotomy, which is better known as the Madonna horror complex. It's pretty much only called Princess Witch and Utena. This idea that a girl has to be either a perfect, pure princess or an evil, corrupt witch, and she's not allowed to be anything else, and trying to break out of that. It's trying to break out of all the patriarchal stuff that we get taught in fairy tales, all of the oppressive social order around gender and sex and who you can love and who you can be. The show repeatedly references apocalypse and revolution, including in the title. The movie is called Adolescent Apocalypse, and is sort of a retelling of the story. And yet, there's no giant meteor impacting the earth, there's no divine judgment wiping out all existence. What there is a duel that, at the end of which, the dueling system that you'll understand when you watch, possibly. I've watched it a couple times. There's this system of duelists that kind of dominate the school, and that system is destroyed in the final episode. And the school is the world of this show. We almost never leave it, and pretty much the only time we do is a really weird comedy episode. Elephants on skateboards, y'all. Or surfboards. It's amazing. It's one of the greatest episodes of anything ever. And so, by the definition I was giving, this is the one I was talking about where the apocalypse is school-wide. But the school is the entire world of the show. So, we get 3 transformations as a result. We get a personal transformation. Utena and Anthe are able to go free and love each other, and in the movie they get to make out, and it's awesome. It's a social transformation for Otori Academy. The system of dueling has been overthrown. Things are going to be different now. We don't know exactly how different. Things aren't going to be perfect, but it's different. And it's a narrative transformation. It's taking all these fairy tale ideas that get introduced at the very beginning of the first episode, which tells us a story about a sad princess and a handsome prince, and has taken that whole thing and just completely upended it. That is not a story that works anymore. Other stories will have to be told. It's an amazing show. You should watch it. Once again, free on YouTube. You have no excuse. Gorgeous soundtrack, too. Anyway, let's move on to a really obscure show. How many people have seen this? Wow. Awesome. So this is Saikano. This is an interesting show. This is a show about 2 high school students who fall in love and have all the trials and tribulations of first love, and also there's an apocalyptic war happening off screen, and the girl is the ultimate weapon. And over the course of it, one of the conflicts going on over the course of the show is that she feels she's losing her humanity. She has blackouts in which she is just pure weapon and murders enormous numbers of people, and then comes back to herself. Both of the main characters are rape survivors. Metaphorically-ish in Chisei's case, that's the girl. But the military took her without her consent and did things to her body, and now she's the ultimate weapon. We never find out why her. There's never a reason why her. She has these nasty disassociation episodes I told you about, which is an abuse response. It's very common in abused kids, and she lashes out violently during them, which, again, very common in abused kids. Shuji, the boy, was sexually abused by his coach. It's really fucked up. He was like 13 or something really awful like that. He has a subtler form of dissociation where if you pay close attention, whenever a conversation gets emotionally intense, he gets really distractible. And he starts like looking away, looking around, not focusing on what's happening. He has massive trust and intimacy issues, and he's got some sexual dysfunction problems. Again, these are all trauma responses. These are two traumatized children trying to connect to each other, and it is heartbreaking and devastating and hard as hell and amazing. I cannot recommend this show just because of how tough the subject matter is, but it's so good. And the war is a metaphor for their relationship. The war tracks with their relationship. They have a bad fight, and the war starts going worse off screen, she gets called away. Like, they're always complicating in that way. To the point where the war is almost, especially because Chise keeps getting called away to it, it's almost like another relationship she has. It's conflicting with her relationship with him. But, and again, spoilers, but, you know, this is a really hard show to find. I think last I checked, you could get the DVD set off of Amazon for $300 and they had one copy. Yeah, it's not an easy show to find. I should note, when I first suggested I was doing this panel like 8 years ago, my friend Vika was like, "You're covering Psychono, right?" And I was like, "What the heck is that?" She just handed me the DVD set. She's awesome. Anyway, eventually, they managed to break through all this. They managed, there it goes again. They managed to make that connection with each other. They managed to truly and fully love each other, and Chise's increasingly out of control power destroy the world. The end. Well, she is able to rescue his consciousness as part of her, like, now world-spanning cyborg, whatever the heck it is. And so they get to live in a fantasy world where they can just be normal teenagers. And it's just the two of them. But yeah, bit of a downer. But the point is, although it takes destroying the world to do it, they are able to achieve that transformation. They are able to connect. All right. Monica. I assume a lot of people have watched this. Yay! This is another really fantastic show. I have actually written a book about this show. It's called The Very Soil. I could really go in depth about it, but I'm going to limit this to just a few points. The show is framed by apocalypses. The first episode opens with a dream sequence in which Monica witnesses an apocalypse. She witnesses the destruction of her city by that floating doll thing, which is Valparaiso. But over the course of the story, another revolution happens, a social revolution, because we are once again in that princess-witch dichotomy from Utena. There's a line in Utena that a girl who cannot be a princess has no choice but to become a witch. That's essentially literal in manga. Spoiler for a 8-year-old show. The magical girls in it, the witches they're fighting are them. They become witches if they fail, which inevitably they eventually do. And so Monica eventually gets into a position where she can change this. She gets into a position where she can achieve a revolution, an apocalypse, literally. She destroys the universe and replaces it with another one, in which there are no witches. She destroys the concept of witch and becomes essentially the pure essence of princess. She is Gothica, she's beautiful, there's a picture of her later in the panel. Marukami is also a common name for her. And for a while there was actually a joke religion worshiping her. They had a holy war against the Haruhi people. God, there's a show I haven't thought about in a long time. Anyway, so she becomes this pure essence of princess, but there's a problem, because as Utena was exploring, princess and witch are traps. You have to break out of both of them. So if Monica is now the pure essence of princess, there's still a trap. The revolution isn't over. You might need a new one, some kind of, I don't know, rebellion? So then the third movie happens, and that I literally talked about for half a book, so I'm not going to talk about here. This is where this panel used to end. It does not anymore, because a few months back I watched another show that has a bit of apocalypse in it. Devilman Crybaby. Who's seen this? It's pretty good, it's on Netflix, don't watch it at work. That is one of the very few screenshots I can actually show in a PG-13 panel. Devilman Crybaby is about compassion in an evil world. The titular crybaby is, he does not cry for himself. He cries because he feels compassion for others. He cries for the pain suffered by others. And there's a lot of pain to go around because the whole world is just endless violence. This show has some of the least sexy sex I've ever seen. I mean, it's erotic horror with the emphasis on horror. It's good, don't get me wrong, but it's it depicts good and evil, kind of going back to that Damien root, it depicts good and evil as being opposing sides. It's about conventionality and chaos. Again, that should sound familiar. It's what a lot of apocalypses have been about since Damien, especially anime ones, because I can only assume Ikuhara kept loaning that book out. That, or, by this point you've got people directing anime for whom Evangelion and Utena were the things they watched as teenagers. You've got, so, convention versus chaos. Humans and demons and the conflicts between them makes up most of this show, and they are both incredibly cruel. Demons, obviously so. They like to, rip people limb from limb, do horrible things to them. Humans, on the other hand, just start murdering anyone they even remotely suspect of being secretly a demon. Or a demon sympathizer. Or just one of those people, those people. But as bad as humans and demons are, wow, is God ever worse. God never actually shows up in this, but yeah, the God side destroys more than anybody else, because apocalypse. A lot of this is about dehumanization of the other. There is a scene where one of the characters is just reciting, like he's saying that demons disguise themselves as humans, but they don't have real feelings, and they're incapable of love, and all they do is hate and kill and destroy. And this is stuff that people have said about groups of people in the real world. And he is doing it on purpose because he wants power by manipulating one group of people into killing another. Which is why people say stuff like that about groups of people. It's about the cruelty we visit on one another and the inevitable cycle of destruction that results. It's not a happy show, but again, it ends with the destruction of the world and the creation of a new one, and maybe the possibility that this time around we'll get it right. Maybe this time it'll be better. Which is kind of the point I want to end on. Oh, there's Gotha. At the end of all things. Like I said at the beginning, the apocalypse is a genre of hope. It is not be afraid, things are coming to an end. It's good news, things are coming to an end. Everything you suffer, everything that oppresses you will eventually end, so really all you have to do is last longer than it does. The boss you hate the society that tells you you're wrong to be you, the conqueror that takes your people over, the colonizer, everything, all of that is a temporary state because everything is a temporary state. And therefore there is always the possibility that whatever comes next will be better. That's the panel. Here is a list of works I discussed in the panel and books that I looked at while working on this. Down there at the bottom, that book by Jenny Blue, Animated Discussions, that's me. I get to put myself in my own panel because it's my panel. So yeah, I'll leave that up for a second. Are there any questions, comments, anything like that? Okay. Here's a list of all the panels I'm doing this weekend. I'm doing Answer the Question, The Radical Aesthetics of Steven Universe at 7 in City 3, which is the large room on this side that isn't this one. Tomorrow I'm doing a bunch, including I'm spending 4 hours in River 1, talking about first Ikuhara, and then My Little Pony, and then Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant. It's a My Little Pony sandwich with Ikuhara bread. Sunday, Neuropocalypse of 09 is a project I've been working on for a while. The first book in the series comes out next year. It's about the DC animated universe. Also talking about The Good Place and talking about trans readings of stuff. This is where you can find me online, and I have cards if anybody wants one. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you like the panel.